I opened the door to find two uniformed police officers standing on my porch, their expressions as serious as a heart attack. One of them, a guy with a mustache too perfect to be real, held out a piece of paper. "You're under arrest," he said, voice firm. I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" The second officer, a burly man who looked like he'd never passed a physical exam in his life, adjusted his belt. "Violation of HOA regulations." For a split second, I thought they were joking. I almost laughed. Almost. But then I saw how stiffly they stood, the way they kept glancing at each other as if waiting for me to comply. I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms. And which regulation did I break that's so severe it requires an arrest? Mustache Man cleared his throat. Failure to maintain lawn standards, accumulation of unapproved outdoor decorations, and repeated refusal to pay fines. I stared at them. They stared back. That's when I realized these weren't real cops. First, no actual police officer arrests someone over lawn violations. Second, the warrant in their hands looked like it had been printed from Microsoft Word and signed with a shaky hand. And third, the sheer absurdity of it all. Who gets sent to jail for an untrimmed hedge? I kept my expression neutral. If these guys were dumb enough to impersonate law enforcement, I wanted to see how far they'd go. "All right," I said, stepping out. "Take me in." Mustache Man faltered. You're cooperating." "Of course," I said. "I mean, if the HOA has declared me a criminal, who am I to argue?" Burly guy reached for his handcuffs, fumbling with them like he'd never used a pair before. That's when I struck. In a blur, I grabbed his wrist, twisted it behind his back, and had him on his knees before he could react. Mustache Man reached for something, probably a fake badge, but I was faster. I pinned him against the porch railing and yanked his radio from his belt. "This should be good," I muttered, holding it up. "Who are you calling?" "The chief of HOA police." Mustache Man whimpered. Burly guy groaned beneath me. I leaned in. "Fun fact," I said. "I work for Homeland Security." They froze. Absolute silence. Then Burly guy did the one thing I didn't expect. He started crying. That's when I knew this was going to be a long, long night. It all started when I moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago, looking for some peace and quiet after years of dealing with international threats and high-stakes operations. I wanted a normal life, a place where I didn't have to think about security clearances or classified briefings. I picked this suburban slice of America because it seemed like a safe bet. Nice houses, friendly neighbors, and a homeowners association that, at first glance, seemed harmless. Oh, how wrong I was. Within a week, I got my first warning. A neatly folded letter appeared on my doorstep, sealed with an official-looking HOA stamp. The offense was that my mailbox was the wrong shade of blue. Apparently, Ocean Breeze was a violation of the HOA's strict color palette, which only allowed Twilight Sky and Regal Navy. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Then came the second warning. This time it was about my trash cans. According to HOA regulations, they had to be stored in a concealed manner at all times, meaning I couldn't leave them on the side of my house even though no one could see them. I ignored the letter. Big mistake. The fines started rolling in. First $50, then $100, then $500. It was like dealing with a mob, except instead of broken kneecaps, they threatened me with liens on my property. I figured they'd get bored and move on to some other poor neighbor. Instead, they doubled down. They started sending compliance officers to my house, glorified hall monitors with clipboards who measured my grass with a ruler and took pictures of my driveway. It was comical at first, then it became harassment. One afternoon, I caught one of them peeking through my backyard fence with a camera. When I confronted him, he stammered something about unauthorized lawn furniture before sprinting away like a guilty raccoon. The HOA president, a woman named Eleanor with the personality of a wet paper towel and the moral compass of a cartoon villain, led the charge against me. She had an iron grip on the neighborhood, ruling with a mix of massive, aggressive emails and thinly veiled threats. If she wanted something done, it happened, no matter how ridiculous. She once fined a guy for having a bird feeder that attracted non-native species. At first, I played along. I trimmed my grass, moved my trash cans, even considered repainting my mailbox. But then they crossed a line. I woke up one morning to find a massive, neon orange sticker plastered across my front door. Final notice. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Beneath it, in smaller text, was a fine of $5,000. I wasn't about to pay a cent. That's when Eleanor got creative. The fake cops were supposed to scare me into submission. They thought I'd panic, comply, maybe even pay off my fines just to avoid jail. What they didn't know was that I deal with actual criminals for a living. So there I was, standing on my porch, two grown men in discount police uniforms trembling under my grip. I pulled out my phone and called the real cops. "Yeah, I've got two individuals impersonating law enforcement," I said casually. "Think you can swing by?" Mustache man started hyperventilating. Burly guy mumbled something about how he didn't sign up for this. When the real officers arrived, it took them all of 30 seconds to confirm what I already knew. The cops were hired by none other than the HOA. Eleanor had paid them under the table to arrest me, hoping to scare me into moving or at least paying my bogus fines. But she'd underestimated me. As the fake cops were carted away, I stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching as my peaceful little neighborhood descended into chaos. I could already hear whispers spreading from house to house. Eleanor had messed with the wrong guy, and I wasn't done with her yet. I sat on my porch, watching the real cops shove the fake ones into the back of their squad car, and couldn't help but chuckle at the sheer absurdity of the situation. The HOA actually thought they could send a couple of amateurs in cheap uniforms to intimidate me. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but now they were about to find out. One of the officers, a guy I recognized from a previous case involving fraud, walked up to me with a smirk. "Homeland Security, huh? I'm guessing these clowns picked the wrong guy to mess with." I nodded. That's one way to put it. They weren't exactly professionals. He glanced at the two fake cops sitting in the back of the squad car, both looking like their lives were flashing before their eyes. "Yeah, no kidding. We ran their IDs. One's a failed security guard, the other works at a gas station. Neither of them has ever been a cop, not even close." I sighed, shaking my head. "And let me guess, they were paid in cash by the HOA?" "Bingo. They admitted it the moment we put them in cuffs." "Apparently, your HOA president thought this would be a good way to teach you a lesson." He chuckled, flipping his notepad closed. "This is some next-level neighborhood drama, man." Drama was an understatement. I had lived through hostage situations, cyber threats, and international espionage. But somehow this suburban nightmare was testing my patience more than anything else. The HOA thought they could operate like a small-time dictatorship, handing out fines, making up rules, and now hiring fake law enforcement to scare homeowners into compliance. I'd let them play their little games for too long. It was time to push back. After the cops drove off with their new prisoners, I went inside, grabbed a beer, and sat down at my desk. My laptop hummed to life, and within minutes, I was pulling up every document, financial record, and complaint ever filed against the HOA. It didn't take long to find something interesting. Their financial records were a mess. HOA funds were being drained at an alarming rate, with huge sums of money labeled as administrative fees and special projects. Yet there were no actual projects in the neighborhood, like new parks or road repairs. Nothing. The money was vanishing into thin air. Then there were the complaints, dozens of them. Homeowners were being fined for imaginary violations, received threats of liens for unpaid dues that didn't even exist, and, in one particularly insane case, a woman was fined for having her Christmas lights up too early. The HOA was running a full-scale scam, extorting money from everyone under the guise of community upkeep, and now they had escalated to impersonating law enforcement. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to dismantle them piece by piece. The next morning, I walked out to get my mail and noticed something strange. My neighbors, who usually waved or nodded at me, were avoiding eye contact. Some were even whispering among themselves. That's when I saw the letter taped to my mailbox. It was another notice from the HOA. I ripped it off and read the first few lines. "Due to your recent aggressive and hostile actions against HOA members, a mandatory meeting has been scheduled to discuss your future in this community." I laughed. A mandatory meeting? Were they serious? They must have thought I was some pushover they could bully into submission. I folded the letter, stuck it in my pocket, and went back inside. If they wanted a meeting, I'd give them a meeting they wouldn't forget. That evening, I arrived at the HOA clubhouse, a small, overly decorated building that served as their headquarters. Inside, a group of people sat in a semicircle, all of them staring at me like I was a criminal. At the center was Eleanor, the queen of HOA tyranny, sitting with her arms crossed and a smug smile on her face. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I took a seat, leaning back casually. Wouldn't miss it for the world. She cleared her throat and pulled out a folder, flipping through papers in an exaggerated manner. "You have repeatedly ignored HOA regulations, refused to pay fines, and now you have caused a serious disruption by involving law enforcement in a matter that should have been handled internally. I raised an eyebrow. Internally? You sent fake cops to my house. She waved a hand dismissively. A minor misunderstanding. I smirked. That minor misunderstanding got 2 people arrested for impersonating law enforcement. I have their signed statements, by the way. Both of them named you as the one who hired them. For the first time, her confident facade cracked. A few of the HOA board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a guy who looked like he regretted every life choice that brought him to this moment, muttered, "Wait, they actually got arrested?" "Yes," I said, pulling out my phone. "And that's just the beginning. I've gone through the HOA's financial records. I found missing funds, fraudulent fines, and illegal threats of foreclosure. I've also spoken to several homeowners who are more than happy to testify about how they've been scammed." Eleanor's face turned red. "That information was obtained illegally. You have no right." "I work for Homeland Security," I interrupted. "You think I don't know how to conduct an investigation? You think I don't know the law?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, her hands gripping the edges of the table. She was cornered, and she knew it. Another board member, an older woman who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should discuss this further before making any accusations." "Great idea," I said, standing up. "Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over all HOA financial records to the authorities. You're going to stop issuing fake fines. And you're going to step down, effective immediately." Eleanor scoffed. "And if we refuse?" I smiled. "Then I take this to the state attorney general, the media, and every homeowner you've ever scammed. And trust me, the only meeting you'll be attending next will be in a courtroom." The room was dead silent. Eleanor's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there wasn't one. She had lost. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stood up. "Fine, but don't think this is over." "Oh, it's definitely over," I said, walking out the door. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath. The battle wasn't completely won yet, but the war was about to be. The HOA had picked a fight with the wrong person, and now they were about to pay the price. I sat in my living room, staring at my laptop screen, the HOA's fraudulent records pulled up in front of me. It wasn't just a few misplaced dollars or some shady accounting. This was full-scale embezzlement. Thousands of dollars had been funneled into administrative fees that didn't exist, and homeowners had been charged for repairs that were never made. The money had disappeared, and I had a very strong suspicion about where it had gone. Eleanor and her little HOA empire weren't just corrupt, they were criminals. The fake cops had been a desperate move, a last-ditch effort to get me out of their way before I dug too deep. But now it was too late. I had everything I needed to dismantle their entire operation. The only question was how far I wanted to take it. I could hand everything over to the authorities right now, let the legal system do its job, and be done with it. But after everything they had put me through, including the fines, the threats, and the harassment, I wanted them to feel what it was like to be powerless. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. I closed my laptop and went to check who it was. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see my neighbor, Tom. He was an older guy, retired military, the kind of man who had seen a lot in his lifetime and didn't rattle easily. But right now, he looked uneasy. "Can we talk?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder as if someone might be watching. I stepped aside and let him in. The moment the door closed, he let out a breath. "Listen, I don't know how deep into this HOA mess you are, but you need to be careful. They're not just about fines and stupid rules. They have connections." I frowned. "Connections? You mean with the city?" He shook his head. "Worse. You ever heard of the Raven Group?" The name sent a jolt of recognition through me. The Raven Group was a private security firm with a reputation for operating in morally gray areas. They weren't mercenaries exactly, but they weren't far from it. They handled corporate security, high-end protection, and problem-solving for clients with enough money to bend the law. If the HOA had somehow gotten involved with them, things were even more serious than I thought. I studied Tom carefully. "How do you know this?" He sighed. "Because I used to work with them years ago, before I retired. I still have contacts on the inside. I heard your name come up. That was not what I wanted to hear." Tom leaned in. "Whatever you're planning, be smart about it. The HOA isn't just running a scam. They're protecting someone. And whoever that is, they don't want attention." I sat back, processing this new information. I had assumed Eleanor was the mastermind, but if there was someone above her, someone pulling the strings, then this was bigger than just a greedy HOA president pocketing fines. "Thanks for the warning," I said. Tom nodded, standing up. Just watch your back. After he left, I reopened my laptop and started looking deeper. If the HOA was linked to the Raven Group, there had to be something connecting them. I combed through everything: emails, financial records, even social media accounts. And then I found it. It was a payment. It was buried under layers of transactions, disguised as a routine expense for community security services. But when I traced it back, the recipient was a shell company known to be affiliated with the Raven Group. The HOA wasn't just extorting homeowners. They were laundering money. I sat back, exhaling slowly. This was bigger than I expected, and it meant I had to be even more careful. Exposing Eleanor was one thing. Taking on a private security firm with a history of making problems disappear was another. I needed a plan. The first step was setting a trap. I needed Eleanor to confirm in her own words that she was tied to this, and I had just the way to do it. The next morning, I made a call to the HOA office, using a voice modulator to disguise my identity. I posed as an anonymous homeowner who had concerns about the recent police activity and wanted to make sure the HOA was still in control of the situation. Eleanor took the bait immediately. "There's nothing to worry about," she said, her voice tight. "We have protections in place. This is all a misunderstanding that will be resolved soon." I pressed further. "And if the police keep looking into it?" A pause. Then she lowered her voice. "I have people handling it. Trust me, this will all go away." That was all I needed. I recorded the entire call. Now I had proof that she was working with outside forces to cover up the HOA's crimes. It was time for step 2. I called my contacts in law enforcement. I had worked with a lot of agencies over the years, and I knew a few people who would be very interested in what I had just uncovered. Within an hour, I was sitting in a coffee shop across from an old friend, Detective Lisa Carter. She listened carefully as I laid everything out: the fraudulent fines, the missing money, the connection to the Raven Group. When I played the recorded phone call, she let out a low whistle. "Well, damn," she muttered. "You weren't kidding. This is serious." I nodded. "So what's the next move?" Lisa tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. "If this is as deep as it looks, we need to handle it right. If we move too fast, they'll bury the evidence before we can prove anything. But if we wait too long, they might try to make you disappear." I smirked. "Let them try." She rolled her eyes. "You're enjoying this too much." I shrugged. "Maybe a little." Lisa sighed. "All right, I'll talk to my people. In the meantime, keep your head down. And whatever you do, don't push Eleanor too hard. She's dangerous, but she's not the real threat. Whoever she's protecting, that's who you need to worry about." I left the coffee shop feeling both satisfied and uneasy. I had enough to bring down the HOA, but if Lisa was right, there was still someone lurking in the shadows, someone who had more to lose than just a neighborhood scam. That night, as I sat in my house going over my notes, I heard something outside. It was a rustling noise, like someone moving through my yard. I moved quietly to the window and peered outside. A black SUV was parked down the street, just far enough to stay out of direct sight. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. The black SUV sat at the end of my street like a silent predator, its engine off, its windows tinted just enough to hide whoever was inside. I didn't need to see them to know they were watching me. I'd been in enough high-stakes situations to recognize surveillance when I saw it. The only question was whether they were here to intimidate me or if they were planning something worse. I closed the blinds and took a slow breath. If they were watching, I needed to act normal. The last thing I wanted was to let them know I was onto them. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, sat on the couch, and flipped on the TV, pretending to be engrossed in a late-night sitcom while my mind raced through the possibilities. If the Raven Group was involved, then this was more than just HOA corruption. Someone was funneling money through this neighborhood for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was worth enough to send professionals to keep tabs on me. After about an hour, the SUV finally pulled away. I didn't relax. If they left, it meant they had what they needed, or they were planning their next move. I needed to make mine first. The next morning, I took a different route to work, doubling back twice to make sure I wasn't being followed. Satisfied that I wasn't, I headed to a meeting with Detective Lisa Carter. We met at a small diner just outside city limits, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and the coffee tasted like burnt regret. She was already there, stirring her cup absent-mindedly, her expression tense. "You were right," she said before I even sat down. "This thing goes deep. The HOA isn't just running a scam, they're laundering money for someone. And the Raven Group is protecting the operation." I nodded. I figured as much. Someone was watching my house last night. Her jaw tightened. They're getting nervous. That means we're close. She slid a folder across the table. I pulled records from the HOA's bank transactions. There's a pattern. Every few months, large sums of money are transferred to an offshore account. That account is linked to a shell corporation with ties to a defense contractor that's under federal investigation for fraud. I exhaled slowly. So this isn't just some HOA president pocketing cash. This is part of a larger money laundering operation. Lisa nodded. And that means Eleanor isn't in charge. She's just a middleman. That changed everything. If Eleanor was just a cog in the machine, then taking her down wouldn't be enough. The real players, the ones pulling the strings, would cut their losses and move the operation elsewhere. I needed to draw them out, make them panic, force them into the open. And the best way to do that was to hit them where it hurt, which was their money. I spent the next few days setting my plan in motion. Using everything I had gathered, I leaked small bits of information to the homeowners, enough to stir suspicion, but not enough to tip off the real players. Word spread fast. People started asking questions. The HOA's usual tactics, such as threats, fines, and intimidation, weren't working anymore. The neighborhood was waking up, and for the first time, Eleanor was losing control. My phone buzzed. It was Lisa. "We have a problem," she said, cutting straight to the point. "I figured," I replied. "What happened?" Eleanor lawyered up fast. Not just any lawyer either. The kind that costs more per hour than most people make in a year. Someone is protecting her. I wasn't surprised. Eleanor might have been arrogant, but she wasn't stupid. The moment she realized she had no way out, she must have reached out to her real bosses. They weren't going to let her talk. "Has she said anything?" I asked. "Not a word. But there's more." Lisa's voice lowered. "I had a guy tailing one of her board members last night. He was seen meeting with a Raven Group operative at a warehouse downtown. We think they're trying to move whatever operation they've been running before we can dig deeper." That got my attention. If they were scrambling, it meant they knew we were close. This was the best chance to catch them off guard. "Where's the warehouse?" I asked. Lisa hesitated. "I shouldn't be telling you this. But you are." She sighed. "Because I know you're going to find out anyway." I smirked. "Exactly." She gave me the address. I didn't waste any time. By the time I got there, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty street. The warehouse looked abandoned, the kind of place nobody would look twice at. I parked a block away, approaching on foot. From the outside, it was quiet, but I could see movement inside through a broken window. A group of men were loading crates into an unmarked truck. Whatever they were moving, they were in a hurry. I counted at least 5 of them, all wearing tactical gear. Definitely Raven Group. I pulled out my phone and dialed Lisa. "I'm here," I said quietly. She cursed under her breath. "I was hoping you'd wait. Patience isn't my strong suit," I replied. "I count 5 operatives moving cargo. Whatever they're shipping, they don't want it here when the police start investigating. Sit tight," she ordered. "I'm sending backup." "Yeah, about that," I said, already moving toward the side entrance. "I think I'll get a closer look." "Damn it. Don't." I ended the call before she could finish. I moved silently along the side of the warehouse, slipping through an unlocked door. The air inside smelled like oil and dust, the dim overhead lights casting long shadows. The men were focused on their work, giving me enough time to find a vantage point above them. From my position on the catwalk, I could see what they were loading. It was weapons, a lot of them. Assault rifles, handguns, even military-grade explosives. This wasn't just money laundering. They were running illegal arms shipments. This was bad, very bad. I needed proof. I pulled out my phone and started recording, zooming in on the crates. Each was stamped with a fake shipping label, but I recognized the markings underneath as military surplus and stolen goods. One of the men barked an order, and I ducked lower, staying out of sight. I had enough evidence now. I just needed to get out without being seen. But luck wasn't on my side. A loose piece of metal shifted under my boot, letting out a sharp clang. Every head in the warehouse snapped up. I swore under my breath. "Intruder!" one of the men shouted. I moved fast, sprinting across the catwalk as bullets tore through the air behind me. Metal pinged and sparked as rounds ricocheted off the railing. I hit the stairs 2 at a time, diving behind a stack of crates as they closed in. I pulled my sidearm, but I was outnumbered. My best bet was to keep moving. The warehouse had a second exit, but it was across the loading area. I waited for a break in the gunfire, then made a run for it. One of the men lunged at me from the side, but I was faster. I drove my elbow into his ribs, grabbed his weapon, and shoved him into another crate. I reached the exit, kicking the door open just as headlights flooded the alley. A police cruiser screeched to a halt, Lisa jumping out with her gun drawn. "Drop your weapons," she shouted. The Raven Group operatives hesitated for a split second. That was all I needed. I spun, firing 2 shots into the air. They panicked, scattering as more police cars arrived, sirens blaring. I turned to Lisa. "You took your time." She glared at me. "I told you to wait." "I did," I said. "For about 5 minutes." She sighed. "You're lucky you're still alive. Luck has nothing to do with it." She shook her head. "You got what you need." I handed her my phone. All on video. Illegal armed shipments, stolen military goods. This ties everything back to the HOA's money laundering. She scrolled through the footage, her expression grim. "This is enough to bring them all down." As the police secured the scene, I leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. The HOA, the Raven Group, the arms deals. It had all been connected, and now the pieces were falling into place. Lisa turned to me. "This isn't over. Whoever was running this operation is still out there." I nodded. "Yeah, but they just lost their best cover." She smirked. "You know, for a guy who just wanted a quiet neighborhood, you sure know how to stir up trouble." I laughed. "What can I say? Bad people have a way of finding me." She sighed. "Go home. Get some rest." I glanced at the burning remains of the operation, knowing full well that this wasn't the end. The real players, the ones pulling the strings, were still out there, and they weren't going to take this loss lightly. I smiled. "Rest can wait. I have unfinished business." The next HOA meeting was packed, homeowners filling every seat, murmuring among themselves. Eleanor sat at the front, trying to keep her composure, but I could see the cracks forming. She knew something was off. She just didn't know how bad it was going to get. I stood up, clearing my throat. "I'd like to address the HOA board." Eleanor forced a smile. "This is not a forum for personal grievances." "This isn't personal," I said, pulling a stack of documents from my bag. "It's financial. Specifically, the thousands of dollars that have been siphoned from HOA accounts into offshore bank accounts linked to a fraudulent defense contractor, and the illegal weapons shipments being funded by it." The room fell silent. Eleanor's face went pale. One of the board members, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, shifted uncomfortably. That's a serious accusation." I placed the documents on the table. "And it's backed up by hard evidence, including transactions, wire transfers, shell corporations, and video proof of arms deals. It's all there. This HOA isn't just enforcing ridiculous rules. It's part of a money laundering and arms trafficking operation. And you've all been used as cover." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Homeowners who had been blindly following HOA rules now looked at Eleanor with suspicion. Someone stood up. "Is this true?" Eleanor opened her mouth, but no words came out. I stepped forward. "Here's the thing. If Eleanor were the mastermind, this might have ended with her. But she's not. She's just following orders. And I'm guessing those orders came with a promise that nobody would ever look too closely. Well, guess what?" I looked. Eleanor's eyes darted toward the exit. That's when I knew she was about to run. I blocked her path. "Where do you think you're going?" She glared at me. "You have no proof." I smirked. "I have more than enough. And so does the police." I turned toward Lisa, who had been standing in the back the entire time. She stepped forward, badge in hand. "Eleanor Smith, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and involvement in illegal arms trafficking," Lisa said. Eleanor's face twisted in rage. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Actually," I said, crossing my arms, "I know exactly what I'm doing." The officers moved in, cuffing her as she shouted protests. The crowd erupted into a mix of gasps and murmurs. Some homeowners were in shock. Others looked relieved. The iron grip Eleanor had held over them for years was gone in an instant. As they let her out, she turned to me, her voice low and venomous. "This doesn't end with me." I didn't doubt that. Eleanor was a pawn, a disposable asset. Whoever was really behind this wasn't going to let it go easily. The fallout from the warehouse raid and Eleanor's arrest spread like wildfire. News stations picked up the story, headlines flashing across screens about a suburban HOA being a front for a money laundering and illegal arms operation. It was the kind of scandal that sent shockwaves through every homeowners association in the country. The city officials scrambled to distance themselves, acting like they had no idea this was happening under their noses. But I knew better. People in power always know. They just pretend not to until it's too late. Eleanor was still in custody, but her silence spoke volumes. Whoever was backing her had enough influence to keep her quiet, and that meant this wasn't over. The Raven Group had taken a hit, but they weren't the type to just walk away from a failed operation. If anything, I expected retaliation. They weren't the kind of people who accepted losses without payback. My suspicions were confirmed when I found a note taped to my front door. No signature, no threats, just a simple message scrolled in precise handwriting. You should have walked away. That was cute. If they thought I was the type to get scared by vague warnings, they had seriously miscalculated. Instead of backing down, I did the opposite. I went to the HOA office the next morning just to see what was left. The place was abandoned, files scattered, desks overturned, as if someone had tried to cover their tracks in a hurry. It was a ghost town, except for one person, Tom. He was sitting in the main meeting room, arms crossed, looking amused as I walked in. Knew you'd show up, he said. I'm predictable like that, I replied. What's the damage? He sighed. HOA is finished. Nobody's paying dues. The board members are either in jail or skipping town, and Eleanor's little empire is crumbling. The city's talking about dissolving the HOA completely. That was the best news I had heard in weeks. Good. Let it burn. Tom chuckled. You know, a few of the homeowners are talking about starting a new HOA. I groaned. Did they learn nothing? He shrugged. People like rules. They just don't like tyrants enforcing them. I leaned against the doorway, thinking. The HOA was dead, but the neighborhood still needed leadership, someone to make sure it didn't turn into total chaos. I had spent so much time fighting against the system, but maybe, just maybe, I could be the one to replace it. I laughed at the thought. What? Are you about to suggest I run for HOA president? Tom smirked. Actually, yeah. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. That's a terrible idea. Maybe, but it would be funny. I considered it for half a second. Me, running a homeowners association? The same guy who nearly got arrested for defying their stupid rules? The same guy who exposed their corruption? It was ridiculous. It was insane. And yet, I was seriously thinking about it. Later that day, I was sitting on my porch when Lisa pulled up, looking exhausted. She walked up the steps and handed me a file. What's this? I asked. Case is officially closed, she said, rubbing her temples. At least as far as my department is concerned. The money laundering operation is done. The illegal weapons have been seized, and Eleanor is going away for a long time. That sounds suspiciously like good news, I said, flipping through the pages. She hesitated. Yeah, that's the problem. I looked up. What? She sighed. Someone higher up doesn't want this case going any further. We found the offshore accounts. We traced the money. But the moment we got close to the people funding all of this, the investigation got shut down. Orders from above. That didn't surprise me. The Raven Group had deep pockets and powerful connections. Someone had decided it was better to bury this than to let it get out of control. So that's it. I asked. They get away with it? For now, she said. But people like that always slip up. You don't run operations this big without making enemies. I nodded, closing the file. I'll be ready when they do. Lisa studied me for a moment. You ever think about just taking a break? Enjoying the fact that you won? I smirked. And miss all the fun? She shook her head. You're impossible. I get that a lot. She started walking back to her car, then paused. Oh, one more thing. The neighborhood's holding a meeting. Some of them want you to take over as HOA president. I nearly choked on my drink. You too. She laughed. Think about it. You take down the corrupt HOA, then you take over and run it right. Could be poetic. I stared at her, waiting for her to say she was joking. She wasn't. That's not happening, I said. She raised an eyebrow. You sure? Because I heard there's a vote, and you might be winning. I groaned. I hate this place. She smirked. See you at the meeting, President. I spent the rest of the evening debating my life choices. Becoming HOA president sounded like a punishment, but at the same time, the thought of making the rules, of turning this place into something better, was tempting. No more ridiculous fines, no more secret fees, no more spying on each other. Just a normal, sane neighborhood, or at least as normal as it could be. The night before the vote, I found another note on my doorstep. This one wasn't a warning. It was a single word. Watching. I stared at the note for a long time. The Raven Group, or whoever pulled their strings, wasn't done with me. They might have lost this battle, but they wanted me to know they were still out there. That was fine. Let them watch. The next day, I walked into the scheduled neighborhood meeting, expecting a debate, maybe even a fight. Instead, I got applause. The homeowners had already made up their minds. I found myself standing at the front of the room, looking out at the same people who had once feared the HOA. Now, they were looking at me expectantly. I cleared my throat. All right, I said, a half-smile playing on my lips. First order of business, no more stupid fines. A wave of relieved laughter filled the room. And second, I continued, leaning forward slightly, anyone who thinks about impersonating a police officer to enforce community rules is getting kicked out immediately. More laughter, louder this time. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. As the meeting ended and people started chatting, planning for a genuinely better neighborhood, I stepped outside. I breathed in the fresh evening air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the houses. But for the first time, this place actually felt like home. I wasn't just here to live anymore. I was here to stay, and maybe, just maybe, make a difference. But somewhere in the back of my mind, that single word echoed. Watching. The fight was won, but the war? That might just be getting started.